Let's see. I'm just going to go. You want?
30 minutes for lunch.
Yeah. I think it might be better to go to the activity and debrief. Okay. I'm going to kind of skip over this part. There's an article by Crystal Weeks and colleagues called The Logical FAP Interaction. I believe it's open access if you look online, or you can always email me after, and I'll just send you the PDF. But it's but basically the idea is when you really think through the 5 rules, to the extent that you can stay with them, it creates a cycle in each session of evoking, seeing if you get a 1 or a 2, blocking a 1, reinforcing a 2. If you've blocked a 1, then you're trying to evoke again. You're trying to evoke again until you have a cycle of 2s that you're reinforcing, where you can explore the impact and where you can brainstorm or generate ideas with the client about how they might practice that too. You know, did you notice how you felt when I responded this way? Have you tried this behavior with other people in your life? How do you believe that they'd respond? Would you be willing to risk that this week? And so getting into that cycle of what's called in these articles into-out reflections. Can you do the thing that you did in here with other people? And we'll come back to that next week. And so this is really ultimately this cycle of reinforcing 2s, generating ideas on how to practice this in the outside world, and then repeating the cycle over and over is all you do with that. And going down.
I find the process really interesting because it allows us to tune into some sort of truth. It's like, you know, what are the lies we tell to ourselves? And as you repeatedly ask, well, what is the truth in this? And what's the more painful truth in this? It sort of just nudges you to sort of go past the reasoning and the justifications to just go that little bit deeper, a little bit more honest.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking as well. I think using the word truth kind of filters out everything else. And it's very sort of, it just creates the space where you just getting down to what's really hurting and really vulnerable. Yeah. And that it's okay to tap into that. And I think the variations and the questions help as well with, you know, what's difficult about this truth? How does it feel to talk about this truth? Can we hold this truth? I think even that as well facilitates that deepening.
And it connects you with the feeling as well. I could really feel it, whereas before I think I could say it, but I wasn't necessarily feeling it. So the connection feels stronger.
Well, and I thought this was good before lunch. It also cuts to that distinction. We all have, you know, sort of the little slightly guarded ways we talk about our lives that function to keep us from feeling. What's the way to talk about it where we're deep in the feeling? What's the way to restate it where we're just right down in the mud? Yeah.
Something I noticed from your previous reel play that you did, and I think it's sometimes very difficult to try and get warmth and evoke.
Yeah.
How do you get that right balance? And I noticed there was a moment when you had a pause.
Yeah.
And when you talked about your chest, yeah, and you felt something, and then it was almost like you paused. And was that a moment where you're going to ask the next question? What's the riskiest moment? It was almost like the transition. And why I'm sharing this, yeah, sometimes I think we're very good at asking the language, the word, what is something else true about what you want to...
Yeah.
When we should be looking at the actual body and their body. So I noticed your moment, and I noticed when we had our conversation, it's not so much of what you're saying, it's when you touched your chest as well.
Yeah.
And you said about feeling tired. So it's something that's a lot deeper than just the language of what we're doing to get that warmth. And that's what I learned that, and I managed to watch that focus on the body more than the language.
That's we'd actually talked a little this morning. I wanted to sort of swap out what I had planned for the last quarter of the day to really emphasize the embodied piece and working with that, because I feel like it's so important to this. And it's true, as he started to describe what's going on in his body, part of the pause for me was, okay, this is evocative in a lot of different ways. And I see, you know, in terms of thinking about different ways we could explore, there was really an exponential shift for me in that moment too, of, okay, holding this, where can we go from here? And what would make the most sense in this context, in this way?
I think that they're really useful actually, because body language is such a key, and you can kind of tell so much, you know, just by watching their body language. And but she also took her hand up and she's like, I feel it here, and it's like that in itself is just having so much.
So then how do you hold that?
You know,
What does it feel right now, in the
yeah.
moment? I think that's something I've learned this morning already, is about in the moment.
Yeah,
It's not what you said yesterday or tomorrow or whatever, it's now.
yeah,
It's that language coming out.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we lose that.
yeah.
So thank you for that, your role play, reminding me of that, the more human part. Yeah.
That's like the whole other workshop.
Yeah. Well, and the client that I mentioned that I've been seeing in teletherapy, this is a client that we for years have started sessions, you know, off and on when I've seen them, with a meditation. And even over Zoom, she has sort of a fluttery, shallow breath during periods of higher anxiety or less self-care. And I realized even on Zoom I can still see the top of the chest, if it does the flutter, or if the breath all can go in. And it tells me right away, you know, before we've even talked, where she is in her body, where her stress is, where her bandwidth for self-care has been. And because of talking of that over the years, like as soon as we finish the meditation, she too will say, okay, so I know you saw I felt this part then and this part here, and so let me tell you how this context has been. And so we start with the body. Yeah.
Thank you. Just help me to that.
Should we go ahead and break for history with key points, losses, landmark events? The structure of it is that in your groups, you'll have 6 minutes. I'll ask that everyone just sort of allow you to speak, and then we'll rotate and I'll make announcements with the timer. You might have an opportunity to share a genuine reflection on what you've heard. If you feel done before the timer goes off, I'll ask that you wait and hold some silence for that moment. Oftentimes that might lead to sharing a bit more. But I want you to think about what are the vulnerable key points in life that really make you who you are, that you'd like to share. Obviously, 6 minutes, you've lived a lot more life than 6 minutes, so the goal is not to like rapid fire cover everything, but just those key things that you would like to dive into. Consider emphasizing those moments that have been under-discussed or under-rehearsed. Remember the low base rate of disclosure as a key part of experiencing vulnerability. What experiences shaped you that you typically hide, that you're typically afraid to share? Consider parts of your experience that might lead to avoidance with your clients, ones that you fear about going into because memories come up. Again, remembering that first slide about comfort zone and so forth, of thinking about, while I'm encouraging you to go to the edge of what feels vulnerable, I want you to check in with yourself too about not going over the edge for yourself. And it's primarily an opportunity to practice the first 2 rules, watching for or actually I disagree with what I put on the slide. I was probably tired. I think it's really rule 1 and 3, since you're listening and then having a chance to respond, which is watching for CRB2s, and then it gives you a chance to genuinely and authentically respond on how you connect with what you've just heard in a way that can be reinforcing. We're going to model this, Tiana and I, in a moment. You might think back to the 12 by 12 exercise at the beginning, thinking about where you avoid. Let's see. For the listeners, I prefer you stay relatively silent, but if your partner seems stuck, feel free to consider a very gentle or minimal encouragement, or an encouragement to share a bit more, to slow down, or whatever might feel necessary. But use that very sparingly. Try not to take steps to fill silence, especially if you're a listener. Even if a speaker chooses to be silent for a moment, to collect their thoughts, to pause. What else came up? What else did you notice?
It was quite alleviating the way to go back and kind of almost like the pinboard, put the strings to, for me, kind of what I'm struggling with at the moment in my personal life with disclosure and opening up. It's always nice to think back to kind of what could explain as to why I'm like this, instead of that intimate frustration in the moment of, you know, why can't I do that? I'm struggling with myself to disclose things or just to say what's on my mind. I very rarely then think back, you know, of my life history to think what's brought me to this place. And it's nice to think, actually, there are reasons why I'm like this. And that's okay. And from where I was to where I am now, I've changed loads. Just to think bigger context, broader scheme of things feels a lot nicer within the moment to think, okay, that's something that I'm dealing with at the moment, but it has been well, it's getting better. There's a reason, and that's quite nice.
Yeah, there's something that's parallel in both DBT and CFT that they all emphasize this idea of the things that we often perceive as our biggest struggles now in our relationships and connecting. We came about them honestly, as they say. It's our history's shaped us, but this was the most adaptable, this was the most workable, this was the best thing we could do at the time. It just isn't now, but we got there in a way that was genuine, that made sense, that we didn't choose. Yeah, it like builds in compassion. Any other thoughts?
I like the timing part as well, because at least I don't do this in my practice. I don't take time, like, okay, for the next 6 minutes, you're just going to say, you're going to talk. But here it was quite powerful, because I needed to, like when I was listening to, I needed to sit with my own questions that was coming up, with my own wonders, and also gave space to the person saying even more. I could always see, like, most of us would stop in the time, like 4 minutes, and then she would be like, you can continue, and then a lot more would come up.
Yeah.
And sometimes was the important bit in the last college. So, maybe think as well, the usage of time.
Yeah, I think it's evocative in both the way of the people who can easily talk for an hour. It forces us to choose and kind of get to what's meaningful. For those of us where it's hard to get those vulnerable words out, it's a challenge to extend it. But then the responding, this is our clinical skill, right? There's so much research in behaviorism that says that it's really just the first few seconds that we have to reinforce or punish something. If your therapeutic style is that you kind of warm up over a few minutes to tell someone why an interaction was meaningful, then you're probably not reinforcing anything. no matter how beautiful it is, you get to in 3 or 4 minutes. So it's intended to kind of challenge you to think a little more tightly. How do I say now why that matters? Any other thoughts?
I'd be quite curious. If you go for therapy, you've got three people helping you. The fact that it was nice that everyone's balancing each other for my problem. And it was just nice to have different point of views.
Yeah.
I'd like to have 3 versus 1.
Yeah.
But it was nice the way they were building on each other there. And I think sometimes when you're on one-to-one, you lose that. Sometimes you don't know if diversity of ideas,
Yeah.
questions or thinking. You've got that in this room.
Well, and the more our partners are willing to kind of dive into their own genuineness of how they've been touched and affected, it lays us out in a more vulnerable way to hear this side being reflected and this side being reflected, and so it helps us settle into our own truths. Any other thoughts?
Certain words that I heard that annoyed me more than anything. The word thank you was bandied around quite a lot. And oftentimes it was used as kind of start to give them feedback.
Yeah.
And this is my own personal experience, and it's not anything else, but when I received it, it felt like tokenism. A word that was just thrown out there. It's supposed to have genuine meaning.
Yeah, the genuine stuff might come after.
The part that, yeah, exactly. And the parts that I found the most nourishing were the genuine statements. People telling me exactly how they felt.
Yes.
As opposed to what I interpreted as things that I would like to hear more than anything. But hearing their take on it and what it affected them, that was far more meaningful than buzzwords, tokenism, whatever it's going to be. So cutting through the niceties and just getting to the core, raw parts, that was the most effective part for me.
Well, and I think especially if you think about sort of that 5-role model of FAP, and if you think about quickly reinforcing, that could be a challenge for everyone going back to a client of what would the quickest way be for me to move right into the part that's meaningful if a client does something that's really vulnerable? How do I get right there? Am I willing to go there first? And even if I have questions, put those aside so that I don't miss this chance to reinforce this moment. You could always come back later with questions. You could always ask them. But if a question is the first response, questions are rarely reinforcing. So. Sometimes, but not as much. Any other thoughts?
I always think the importance of silence. Yes. All of role plays, these group exercises within therapy, just the haste of wanting to fill the silence can dismantle so much good work that's going on and reinforce the clients and my own T1s and CW1s.
Yeah.
And it's just actually sitting with it, because when someone would come up and the table would be silent, the connection was so much stronger. You could actually feel that everyone was thinking, it was heard, which was lovely. Constantly reminded that silence has power.
Definitely. Yeah, there's that. We use words so much to just kind of buffer from the emotion. Anyone else know? So hopefully it's not the rain too difficult a midpoint of the afternoon to do this, but I want to transition into our next activity with a compassion meditation. And so what it will entail, this is a classic from CFT, the Compassionate Other meditation, where you are bringing to mind the image of a loved one and paying attention to the sensations in your body and what this is like. For some individuals, it can be difficult to imagine or to hold images in mind, if that's the case for you. There's actually even some literature that suggests that just having the intent of this experience, as if you were able to picture someone that you're close to, tends to have similar neurological and physiological effects, so you can try that. If you're someone where any part of this becomes aversive or feels overwhelming, feel free to just go back to kind of check in with the weight of your body on the chair, the contact with the floor, ground yourself, and it won't be that long a meditation, and we'll come back together and can talk about it. So I'd like to invite you to just sit in whatever comfortable, grounded way you're okay with for this. You can close your eyes if you like, or though if it's easier for you, you prefer, you could certainly just gaze softly at the table ahead of you. Beginning with a few diaphragmatic breaths, just to ground yourself, maybe in through the nose to the base of the belly. Exhaling completely through the mouth. Infilling the lungs bottom to top. And exhaling top to bottom. When you're ready, perhaps for the first few moments, just noticing the sensation of breathing, the coolness of the air as you inhale, the warmth as you exhale. And I'd like you to bring to mind whatever image there is of someone who represents compassion, strength, wisdom. Could be someone real, someone imagined. It might be a sense of presence, the deity who's a saint. It might be that someone human-like doesn't feel safe at all. It's a beloved pet. Simply seeing what comes to mind. If you don't usually do visual meditations, the image may flicker or drift between different objects, and that's okay. Don't struggle with it, just let it be. Picture the eyes of this being, the lines around the eyes, the tender look. And check in around your heart. What does it feel like to be in the presence of this being? To be looked at as someone who's completely loved and cared for? To be completely seen, all your strengths or your flaws. That this being knows everything about you, good or bad, and still just wishes for you to be happy, and is generating love for you. If you can even imagine light shining from their heart, touching every cell in your body, attempting to alight your own cells, your own self's desire to care for yourself and be happy. Noticing what this feels like around your heart. Your body. Bringing those eyes to mind again. Fully seeing you. everything you've done, everywhere you've been. Only love reflecting back. What's it like to let this in? What do you feel in the core of your body? Allowing the image to fade. Just coming back for a moment to your breath. The coolness of the in-breath, the warmth of the out-breath. Whenever you're ready, opening your eyes. And what do you notice in this experience?
Honestly, I found it difficult to focus on this place.
Yeah.
Give it a little wiggle when you phone left it in. So to really connect with it, it's very hard.
Yeah.
In the moment.
Yeah.
It wasn't probably the right answer.
Well, there's no right or wrong if
There
you
is
were.
emotion though, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't to relax, calm, peace. It's more like noise.
And this is, in FAP, if I were doing this with a client, this goes back to the importance of we track what we do. I think of grad students that might rehearse 15 times for a meditation and then not want to let go, that this would not be the right moment.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, and because I think one of the core sort of behavioral pieces that doesn't get talked about a lot in FAP, but is a really important part of it, is this concept of tacting. And Skinner was very big on making up words. He would, just sort of took tact from words like contact to shorten. He defined it as a verbal operant attached to a nonverbal stimulus maintained by nonspecific social reinforcement, which is a really elaborate way of just saying things that are invisible to other people. The butterflies in our belly when we see someone we're attracted to, the weight in our heart when we've experienced a loss, that learning to attach a label to that, and then having people around us that reinforce it, that's tacting. And when you look at the emotion regulation research, so much of our ability to sit with strong emotions, so much of our ability to cope with strong negative life events is through being able to do this, is being able to put a name to those sensations that don't have any objective quality, that we can't measure in a purely objective way. And Skinner's idea was that this is how we make contact with the world, that this is ultimately the words in the story we put to those animal sensations of our body is how we make sense of the world that we're navigating. So when you label a warm sense of openness around your heart, if that's receiving compassion, and then that gets reinforced by your therapist, that's tacting. If you are able to articulate the experience of your heart feeling closed off and hardened against warmth, when the person that you're working with is responding to you in a way that's either evoking a sense of threat or that you're feeling overwhelmed, that's also tacting. So it's not just a good or a bad practice, but it's how do we dive into cultivating that skill, since many of our clients come with a weak repertoire of tacting. These may be sensations we don't typically pay attention to. If you read like Linehan's manual for DBT, and Linehan attended the University of Washington where FAP was created. Her first edition, anyway, of her manual cites it quite a bit. It was a big influence on DBT. She says part of the invalidating child's environment, and her focus was on borderline personality disorder, but we can apply it broadly to our clients, that the part that gets invalidated is tacting, the part that gets invalidated is also even orienting to those inner experiences. If you're consistently punished for having sensations or experiences that disagree with a caretaker, if it makes it difficult to be around, to be trusting, to be present with your caretaker, if you're paying too much attention to this, then we kind of learn not to. We shift our attention elsewhere. We become hyper-focused on the emotions we read on our partner's face and how they would like us to respond to something. So some of our clients may come, some of us may come to the room with a lot of learning history around not noticing that anyway. And so that's also a place to begin. It may be that doing so is aversive because of that training. And even if it's something positive, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's reinforcing. If you've probably had clients you work with who are afraid to get too excited for the next thing coming in life because the other shoe might drop at any moment. So there's not an automatic trajectory of FAPing being reinforcing or not. Tacting skill as a clinician is incredibly important. So much of FAP and so much of labeling CRB 1s and 2s is learning to notice what's the felt sensation I experience when someone's withdrawing from me emotionally? What's the felt experience that I have when someone is opening up to me, is responsive to me? Learning to note that gives us a way to sort of work backwards. In fact, when you have the felt sense, you could either begin to try and track what's going on with the client when this comes up, or if you're comfortable and confident with it with the client, just to say, I just felt this experience which I associate with withdrawing. What did you just notice in that moment? Did you feel yourself pull away? Was there a moment that evoked that in you, that triggered that response? Noticing what happens in the core of your body can help you detect both 1s and 2s, so it's helpful to cultivate. It can also be a way to model vulnerability. I talked about this earlier this morning, but describing your own tacting process, walking through, whether metaphorically or very literally, depending on how concrete the sensations are in your body. This is what I was feeling. This is the label I'm putting to it. This is how much closer or pulled away I feel from you right now. Modeling this process is a way to help our clients begin to engage in this behavior as well, which can be helpful for their own self-regulation, for their own emotional repertoire. When I shared how much I care about you and you shifted the topic, it felt like a wall went up between my heart and yours. What did you feel? This is a way to model that kind of tacting. Let's skip that for now. And so I want to transition to, there are more complicated ways that we can kind of scale up from the basic tacting of an emotion to those sensations that we have associated with parts of ourselves, with ways we move through the world. B.F. Skinner said that, what is a personality but a complex of behaviors defined by habit and stereotypy. So from the FAP view, our character and sense of self anyway is just a complex of the ways that we routinely and stereotypically move through the world. But we would also assume that we have sensations that we tact that correspond to that. And it makes sense if you think about, when you think about the moment you feel like a really competent therapist, that really good moment in session where it feels like you've done the right thing. What are the emotions that go with that? Are there behaviors that go with that? Postures in your body that go with that? Sensations you feel in your body that go with that? Same with if you're feeling like a bad therapist one day. So the exercise we're going to build toward, sort of looking at ways of defining ourselves. A lot of popular therapies today kind of attend to our different inner selves. Compassion-focused therapy spends a lot of time thinking about our compassionate self, our critical self. Internal family systems is, I don't know how it is in the UK right now, but in the US it's incredibly popular at the moment, which involves labeling a lot of different parts of the selves and their roles. And behaviorism considers selfing a verb. It's, so self-relevant tacting just makes up a particular type of tacting. It's a way of noticing one of the ways we move through the world. A self at any given moment could be under stimulus control of someone else. What does that mean? Well, think about you go off to grad school, you move away from your parents for the first time, or maybe out of their city. A number of years pass. You go home for the holidays. Your mom makes that comment she does about your weight or about how you're dressed, and you start responding in a certain way that makes you feel embarrassed in front of the date you brought home, or whatever. We all have those cues, those stimulus cues, that take us back, that put us in the mind of another self. So what this exercise is we'll get to is labeled inner voices. This is an exercise that Mavis developed in response to clients diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. But it gives us an opportunity to practice reinforcing and labeling different components of ourself, different components of our experience of self. Recognizing these shifts in selfing can raise our awareness of what are the contexts where myself, where how I experience myself is under public control. Meaning there are cues that push me, is it hard? When I'm dressed up in a certain way and I'm sitting in my therapy office, have these become cues that make it difficult for me to feel authentic and vulnerable? What about other places in my life where I have cues that are pushing for me to engage in a certain way, to take on a certain stance toward responsibility, toward emotions? So I'm going to, I moved it from, originally it was going to be tomorrow, but it felt more fun to do today. That's why these are all referring to your homework. It's not your homework. We're going to do it momentarily. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to give out a handout that has some examples. I wonder if, it just takes a second. So what we'll do is I'll ask you to join a partner for a moment, and I want you to consider, just because we'll just do this for a brief time, I'll prompt you after 5 minutes to switch, but I'd like you to ask your partner if they're willing to share with you. No, this is a deep, I put the different slides back. That's okay. The questions are very similar, which is ultimately, as you look at these selves, what's one that I wouldn't see? What's one that feels underexpressed, under-rehearsed, underseen in your life right now? Or what's a part of yourself that perhaps you miss? What's a part of yourself you never get to talk about? Any of these prompts will do. You don't have to ask every single one. I just want you to pick, or if none of those feel like a fit, it could just be because many of you already have a history with one another today, even if you'd never met before, to ask, what self would you like to share with me? You could simply start there. So again, I'd like you to take an opportunity. This is not like the life histories. You don't have to be silent. I'd like to invite you to consider, as your partner shares with you, what are ways, as you think about holding those FAP rules in mind, of reinforcing vulnerability, authenticity, of evoking. What are the questions that, or what are the ways you would reinforce the sharing? What are the questions you would ask that could be evocative to learn more? See if you could follow your gut in the way that we talk about with tacting. Where does it resonate that you feel you should be led? Is it to ask about the history of this self? To ask about why this self isn't talked about, or why it felt important? So